Tell me what you made of the hearing yesterday.
The industry, the Bitcoin mining industry, was surprised to see that the Texas Senate and the Business and Commerce Committee were not more supportive of flexible loads like Bitcoin miners that curtail power consumption during peak demand times. If we're going to have a lot of intermittent generation on the Texas grid, like wind and solar, we need significant amounts of intermittent load that's willing to be flexible and willing to curtail. And so there's a lot of ERCOT data that demonstrates that Bitcoin miners are responsibly curtailing and curtailing up to 95% during peak demand times in summertime and oftentimes during the winter as well. So we were a little bit surprised by the tone and tenor of the committee hearing.
Is that the first time you've really heard that tone and tenor from lawmakers in Texas?
In the last legislative session, in the 88th session in Texas, we did hear specifically from the Senate Business and Commerce Committee some skepticism about Bitcoin mining. And I think the largest part of the skepticism comes from the fact that they believe that Bitcoin miners are putting out the fire that they're creating, which is actually an untrue characterization. Most Bitcoin miners are curtailing their power consumption when prices of power in the wholesale market are higher than their break even. So you're getting a load that's balancing out the load profile in Texas. So they're not consuming power during times of high demand, but they are consuming excess power in times when the grid doesn't need it, like overnight or during days where there's good weather outside and we're not consuming a lot of power as a society.
Let's expand on that for a second, because in the statement, for example, from the lieutenant governor, we heard sort of, at least for the first time, I heard kind of this questioning of the value of cryptocurrency mines in general. To make what you're saying true, that they are valuable, that they are curtailing and responsive, they have to provide some value to society. So what is that? What would be your response to that sort of line of questioning, that they're not bringing as much value as they are demanding?
Yeah, Bitcoin is a very large commodity asset. It's larger than silver, and we believe one day will be on par with gold as a commodity. In addition to securing that network, Bitcoin miners are soaking up excess energy, particularly in West Texas, where we have more energy than demand. And they're also soaking up energy in off hours, overnights, and in times of shoulder months, good weather, fall and spring, when we actually need additional demand to incentivize more generation, to incentivize nuclear, natural gas, and wind and solar. And to have a AI data center or a hyperscaler data center that never curtails, is on 24/7, is a much different calculation than when you have a Bitcoin miner that is willing to curtail when prices are high.
There was some, though little, discussion of AI and data centers yesterday. What do you make of that? Just the absence of that in this conversation.
AI data centers will consume far more power throughout the nation than Bitcoin miners ever will. And so that's a serious conversation that needs to be had, although we believe that in energy abundance, so there's nothing wrong with AI data centers. We just think that Bitcoin miners with their flexible load profile are actually more effective for grid stability. Doesn't mean that there's anything wrong with AI data centers. They're just not capable of performing that service for the grid.
One of the things that came up, and you said, you all supported, is the controllable load resources, CLR thing. I'm curious, can you expand on why you would support that and support mandating that, I guess, for all crypto mines, and what might need to happen in order to do that?
We certainly would support more Bitcoin miners getting into CLR, controllable load resource, and Bitcoin miners want to get into that. There are a few technical and legal challenges that are getting taken care of so that more Bitcoin miners can get into that category, but they perform the same function even without being in a CLR category. So Bitcoin miners are still curtailing, but in CLR, ERCOT is able to have greater visibility of that curtailment and can predict that curtailment with much more accuracy.
So what do you hope? What does the industry hope comes out of these discussions? Because it seems that lawmakers have an appetite to take some action somewhere. It's just a matter of what that action is.
Yeah, we would hope that lawmakers would realize that Bitcoin miners are a resource. Once we are in CLR in a larger way, ERCOT is going to be able to use Bitcoin miners like a demand side battery. So we are curtailable. There'll be clear visibility and clear line of sight about when Bitcoin miners can curtail. And that's a very productive thing for the grid. And there's 3,000 megawatts of Bitcoin mining in Texas. And so to have that amount of power that can shut off at a moment's notice in times of high demand is something quite significant and not unlike providing more battery storage for the grid.
I think my last question here, and it goes back to something we talked about a little bit earlier, but again, with the characterization of curtailment and you guys participating in ancillary services, that you're putting out a fire that you are starting. I guess that debate really ultimately comes down to whether or not you value cryptocurrency, just as a person, whether you find it valuable. So I wonder if you feel like if more people understood cryptocurrency, and could really kind of grasp it better, if you'd be running into this argument.
You know, even if people do not understand cryptocurrency or are opposed to it, Bitcoin miners are still providing a valuable function. So imagine that they were doing something completely different and not mining Bitcoin. Having a data center that can soak up underutilized power and curtail at a moment's notice is a tool that has never existed at scale on any grid in the world. And so we have a really tremendous opportunity here in ERCOT with all of the Bitcoin mining that's here. So you really don't have to believe in Bitcoin or even like it to see the benefits that the industry can provide to the state of Texas.